I'm not sure that Betsy ever thought that the Kickstarter would be successfully funded, because when it was, she didn't seem to know what she was supposed to do. Nor did the rest of her so-called staff. It took them forever to get to selling tickets, and when ticket prices were announced, people kind of went crazy over the prices. As you can see here, there were 3 different types of tickets at 3 different prices. Huge prices. Even the most basic ticket, which only got you the most basic of things, was $160. The most expensive ticket was $325. And keep in mind, this was more or less just entry into the convention. The events that you got access to automatically were a couple of poorly run fan panels about Hannibal erotica fanfiction and a few question and answer sessions. Otherwise, you would have to buy everything else. And believe me, they nickel and dime the ever-loving shit out of everything that they could. For example, the bus tour that they were promising everyone, they couldn't get that together until almost the very day of the actual convention. Anytime they were asked about this bus tour, they didn't have an answer on the price or the timing, and it was the same thing with Janice Poon and the dinner. For people who don't know, Janice was the food chef and designer for everything on the actual TV show of Hannibal, except they failed to mention that Janice wasn't really cooking or designing anything herself. She would kind of be supervising chefs in a kitchen who she'd never met or worked with before to prepare things at the last moment, and not very well, may I add. The tickets were over $100 for the dinner, and nearly $200 if you wanted to have a glass of wine with it. Keep in mind, this wasn't a dinner actually made by Janice. It was going to be made by chefs at the Hilton, where they were having this convention. People who were never ever trained for the kind of food artistry that Janice Poon was. So this makes it extremely overpriced, if you ask me. Though these prices also weren't announced until extremely close to the convention either. Typically, whenever they were asked about prices of any of the events, they just would say that it was to be decided. The complaints about the ticket prices, just to get into the convention, got so bad they started offering installment plans for people to pay, except they did it really, really late in the game. With their successful Kickstarter, they had raised close to $15,000, so people were obviously pretty pissed off that tickets to get in were so high, and they didn't cover most of the fun events like the dinner with Janice or the bus tour. There were more and more questions about what exactly it was they were doing with the $15,000 they were given, considering they said they only needed about $10,000 to get everything started. This would include everything that was listed on the graph. Then they said with any money they additionally made, they would use it for everything else, but they still seemed to be hemorrhaging money all over the place. They also announced quite a few guest appearances before the guests were actually confirmed to appear. Appearance fees for guests at a typical convention are extremely high, and that's just for them to appear there, not to also do photo ops and sign autographs. People were concerned with how exactly they were paying these people to show up and with what money, or if they were promising them money that they knew they didn't have based on the projected ticket sales. Interestingly enough, they definitely projected ticket sales to be extremely high for some weird reason, because they opened a Sponsor My Event website where they claimed to expect to see anywhere between 501 and 1,000 attendees. Though that number was grossly exaggerated, it also wasn't even possible because the conference room they booked at the Hilton could legally only hold 500 people. And only 79 people actually backed the Kickstarter. And if you look at the photos and videos from the event, you can tell that at most, maybe 100 people showed up. If I'm being generous, 200. This didn't stop them from lying to brands to get sponsorship and even more money, though God only knows what they did with it, considering if you even tried to ask them about it, you'd get a response like this. Anonymous asked, "If the Kickstarter was just for startup costs, can you explain where you're getting the money to afford the guests so I can be reassured that they actually will appear? Is it based on ticket sales?" Fannibal Fest answered, "If you need to know how conventions work, where the money comes from to pay for everything, why don't you step up and start your own convention and learn how to do it on your own, instead of making these loaded insinuations about us? We don't have to tell you anything about what we do with the money or how we're spending it. We're a private corporation. You go ask another private corporation to prove what they are doing with their money and what funds went to what expenses, and see how far you get." It should be noted, as previously mentioned, despite Betsy's claim of Fannibal Fest being a private corporation, publicly listed documents and filings clearly revealed them to be a 501c3, which is a charity organization. As I also mentioned previously, this was brought up directly to Betsy numerous times, to which she chose not to answer for some reason, and this was pointed out by many other people, that if she had her corporation registered as a 501c3, then she absolutely did have to disclose the budgeting process. I'm sure there is no way Betsy didn't know how she filed her own corporation or what was on her own paperwork. Though they did change this filing a year later, it is unknown if Betsy was doing this at an attempt at fraud or just complete and utter incompetence as a convention runner. As the convention drew closer and closer and they advertised the dinner with Janice and the bus tours more and more, without also including the prices or any prices for photo ops and autographs, people were getting skeptical about if this was even going to be a convention or the next DashCon. About 2 months before the convention was going to happen, they finally announced the bus tour ticket prices and the schedule. At this point, we need to realize how insane this convention pricing and scheduling actually is. If you wanted to go to this convention and pay the least amount possible, but also do everything that they were offering as additional ticketed events, consider the cost. Basic membership just to get in the door was $163. The dinner with Janice was $133 if you didn't want wine. The bus tour, if you wanted to go both days, was $125, for a grand total of $421. Except none of this would have included travel or hotel stay. They did have a discount rate at the hotel where they were holding the convention, but if you wanted to do both days of the bus tour, that meant you'd have to stay a minimum of 4 to 5 nights, considering that you had to be there early in the morning on Thursday for the first bus tour and stay until late Monday for the conclusion of the bus tour. That would make it an additional $436 if you chose to stay at the hotel they booked at the discounted rate. Obviously, no one was going to make anyone stay there if they wanted to stay somewhere cheaper, but this was being held in Toronto, Canada, so almost any option was going to be at least a couple $100s if they wanted to be in the city and close to the convention. At this point, we are up to a total of $857, and this still doesn't include travel or food that would need to be purchased outside of the dinner meal that they were providing. It also didn't include prices for autographs or photo ops, which pretty much weren't announced until basically the day of the convention, and each one was close to $100. There was also complaints that the listed prices on the website for the photo ops weren't the actual real prices, and if you wanted to pay there in person, it was double what the website said, and you couldn't pay them in cash, and that was just a whole clusterfuck of a problem. In the end, there was practically no way to budget for this convention because they dragged their feet on every turn to announce what every price would be for everything, and then even changed prices the day of the convention when they apparently needed more money or didn't price things correctly. Eventually, due to the complaining about this, they decided that they would offer day passes and weekend passes for people who couldn't afford to attend the entire thing, but you had to have one of the membership tickets to get anything extra. For instance, if you only got a day ticket for Saturday, that wasn't a membership ticket. You know, one of the expensive ones. So you couldn't also then buy a ticket for the bus tour or the dinner with Janice. Even the daily ticket pass rates were extremely outrageous compared to what one would generally expect from a convention. Through all of this, of course, I was pointing out what a clusterfuck everything was, and I was getting repeated death threats over my commentary on the unprofessional way things were being run. An infamous Fannibal named Monica Moraes was sending me a lot of threats, and she ended up doxing me more than one time over this, but she has since been banned from Twitter for her extremist behavior, so that just says a lot about how psychotic some of these Fannibals can get. Once again, all of this was just because I was trying to warn people about whatever this scam was, or this convention, whatever you want to call it. To this day, I'm not entirely sure if it was an outright scam, if it was just poorly run, or it was a poorly run scam, but I do know that the end game in all of this was for Betsy and her 3 friends to be able to party with the cast and crew of Hannibal while the rest of the fandom funded it for them. After all of this, you think that they would have had enough sense to close up shop and not try to do it all over again, except they did. They continued with this, thinking it was some kind of great success, even though it obviously wasn't. They also promised that for the second Fannibal Fest, tickets would be even cheaper and they would need even less money on Kickstarter the second time around. As you can imagine, all of that turned out to be a complete lie.